Okay, so we have all that set up in a subroutine. Let's set up our first level here in such a way to where we can add a trigger to load the next room and to change to the next room. So I have this little doorway over here, but I haven't added this to my collision map to actually walk through it. So let's add this. So that's going to be roughly here. I'm going to call these 0. Call these 0. And this isn't the full collision map, but let's show what that did. Let's walk into this doorway. But now I can actually walk too far. You'll see me popping out of the left-hand side. So on the opposite end of this collision map, let's label these as solid tiles so we don't wrap around. Let's try that. Let's go into this doorway. Okay, we're not wrapping around, but I have a couple zeros that are accounted for. So if I go up, I can actually just clip into the wall, which is not good. So let's account for those zeros and turn those into ones. Bam, bam. And this should be our little doorway. Okay, so we can't clip out of bounds just from being inside the doorway. So to make our room trigger, we're going to detect the X position of the sprite because they can't ever reach this far X position until they're inside the door. So that's going to be just a simple box standard way of checking if they're in the loading zone, because they can't clip through this wall over here. So if they're on the right hand side, they've entered the loading zone. Now what is this pixel position? Hex editor, let's go to the sprite values. And let's actually look at that changing. So that's going to be this bit right here. It's currently F5. Let's watch that change. And the maximum value is going to be F8. So F8 is going to be what we're going to set as our trigger. I'm just going to remember that up top. So trigger value is F8, just so I don't forget it. And where do we want to detect that we've entered the loading zone? Now we can do it in several different ways. We could put it in the NMI routine and it would check once a frame, but it may be a wasteful check because it's checking it constantly even if you're not moving. So for now I'm going to put this in my move right routine because I only want to check if I'm moving to the right because that case is needed to actually enter the loading zone. I have to be moving right. So at the very bottom, I'm going to do jump to subroutine, check loading zone, or check load zone. Now, what do we want to have happen in this loading zone? So I want to check that I'm on name table 0. So load name table, compare with 0, and break if it's not equal to the exit. Because if I'm not on the first name table, I don't want this loading zone to be active. Because we have a loading zone on this screen, but if I change to the other screen, level 2, this is more of like an open space, and this loading zone could be across this entire wall, even though we're using the same collision map. I only want one loading zone. Change that back to level 1. Sorry, it's just called level. Let's go back to our check load zone parameters. So if we're on the first name table, we're in this section of the code. What else do we want to check? We want to check player x pause. Now we want to check the right hand side. Oh, no, because that value was F8. So that is the value we need. We don't care about anything else. We don't need to worry about offsets like we did with collision. So load and compare with F8. And branch if not equal to to the exit. Now, what happens when we hit the loading zone? We're going to jump to subroutine. Let's just jump. We're going to jump to load level 2, and we're going to load the level 2. So this is going to be load level 2. Pardon me. So load level 2. What do we have to do to load a level? We set up the data pointer with the level 2 data. So we load the low byte of level 2. We store that in the data pointer. We load the high byte of level 2, and we store that in the high byte of the data pointer. What else do we need? We need to turn off the screen. So let's change our name table, and then we'll turn off the screen. So we need to also change the name table. So let's load the name table. And we need a convenient way to toggle this from a 0 to a 1, or from a 1 to a 0. So we need to only worry about the least significant bit, and we have to have a convenient operation to only toggle the bit. Because if it's a 0, the output has to be 1, and if it's a 1, the output has to be 0. Now there's a convenient operation called the exclusive OR operation that'll help us do that. So exclusive OR with a 1. Now let's kind of just run through what this says. So if the input is a 0, and we're exclusive ORing with a 1, what are the rules? So it's like an OR operation, but it'll only output a 1 if only one of the inputs was a 1. So output 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry. Do I have not enough bits? I don't have enough bits. 8. Okay. So if the inputs has only one of the cases true, it'll output a true. But if both of them, so input 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the second input are both 1, here's where the exclusive part comes in. The output outputs a 0. I hope that makes sense. So if this name table is set to a 1, and we exclusive OR with a 1, the output says that's not true because both of them are set, and I only exclusively care about the OR scenario, so either or. But if the name table is 0, and we exclusive OR with a 1, that makes it true, so that outputs a 1. So that's an easy way to target a bit and toggle it on and off. So we exclusive OR with 1, we store that to our name table, because that gets used in the load level subroutine, and it gets used to turning on the screen displaying that name table as well. So now we need to turn off our screen. So turn off screen. And what does that look like? So turn off screen. We write 0 to these two registers. So 2000, this is turning off NMI, and then store to 2001 is actually turning off the screen, turning off the backgrounds and sprites. Background and sprites. Okay, we can return from that. So we're turning off our screen. And now we want to call, we want to jump to load level. Now the reason I'm not jumping to subroutine here is because after this is called, I would have just returned from subroutine. But if we jump, it's just going to use the end of the load levels return, and it's going to return back to where it needs to go. So that just saves on kind of CPU cycles and bytes. So in theory, this should be all we need. Now I don't have a way to test this. Oh, actually we set up the loading zone. So let's test it. There may be some bugs because the player's going to be at the right hand side of the screen, and I don't know if that's going to continue to make that loading zone true. But hopefully when we detected if we're in the first name table, we've counteracted that error that I predict. Okay, so something didn't happen. So we wrote the name table to 2. Oh, we're not in name table 1. Duh. Did I hard code that back to name table 1? I did. Let's turn this back to name table 0. So none of those cases in the loading zone where we're checking if we're in name table 0 were true because we wrote everything to name table 1. Let's try this again. Let's check that we're in the proper name table. Okay, so this loading zone should be active, and I'm hoping it works. Bam! We've loaded the second screen, and we've toggled there. So name table viewer, we have our first screen on the left, and we have our second screen here on the right. And that's successful. I'm glad that worked. I was having reservations on if I set everything up correctly. Now there are other things that we can take into account. You notice the little glitch? Let me reset. Look at what happens when I walk into the loading zone. There's a flicker. So why is that flicker there? Let me do it one more time. We walk into the loading zone, bam, it flickers. So the screen is turning on and the scroll is not reset because we turned on NMI, but we haven't waited for a V-blank to actually keep things stable. So when we turn off screen, that's fine, but we turned off the non-maskable interrupt. So when we turn on screen, that's in our exit. So here where we're turning on the screen, we have to wait for a V-blank. So let's jump to subroutine. Actually, we can just write this. It's not a lot of code. So we're going to wait blank, wait a V-blank. We're going to bit test 2002, break if plus to wait V-blank. And then once a V-blank happens, we exit out of this loop and we turn on the screen. Hopefully that's fixed our little flickering. It has. So it does blacken the screen, so you see that, but it hasn't made it to where the scroll gets weird and flickered out. So let me reset that. Moment of truth. Bam. We're in the next room. The only other thing we may want to do is reset the player to the left-hand side of the screen. So it's like he's coming out of the right-hand side. So let's try that. So check loading zone, blah, blah, blah. Load level 2. Now there's no convenient place for me to put this that makes sense, at least in my head, because I can add this to our loading zone check, and it can be kind of a hard-coded thing, or I can try to put this in load level 2, because that's a case by case. I would always be coming out of the left-hand side of level 2. So let's put it here, actually. So we turned off our screen. We are going to reset player, pause, reset player, pause. Now what do we want to do? We want to load a position on the left-hand side of our screen. I'm just gonna call that 8. So maybe 8 pixels over a tile or two, or let's call that 16, because remember our bricks. No, let's keep it with 8. Let's keep it with 8 because the bricks aren't there on the next screen. So load 8, store in player x pause, and return from subroutine. I think that's all we need, because we turned off the screen, we moved the player over, we load the level, we turn back on the screen. Let's see if that worked. And it did. We traversed our little level. So let's reset it. Let's go to the loading zone. Bam. And we moved screens. So we could have separate triggers on the left-hand side. We could have another trigger on the right-hand side. But we currently have not updated our collision map to reflect this second room, which I believe that should be a topic for the next video. Again, thanks for joining me. I'm glad we got this working, and I'll see you in the next video.